The train left her behind with the same sound a door makes when it's shut for good, long, sharp, echoing through an open land that didn't care who came or went. She stood there in the dust as the last of the black smoke faded into the blue above, her thin shoes sunk in gravel, her shawl clutched around her shoulders like a lifeline. Her red hair, wild and stubborn, whipped in the dry wind. The suitcase beside her had a broken latch and spilled open slightly, revealing nothing much, a folded petticoat, a cracked mirror, a single letter with a smudged seal. She pressed it closed with her foot and looked around. No station. No platform. Just a patch of dirt and some broken fence posts that once promised something, maybe a town, maybe just a name. She had been sent west with the promise of marriage. Sent like freight, not like a woman. The family that met the train had looked her over like a purchase, their disappointment loud in the way they said nothing. No handshake. No welcome. Just a whisper between men, a purse of coins returned, and then a sharp, cold she won't do. The train rolled on. She was left standing beside a dried-up patch of land where nothing green grew. The wind carried the prairie's silence. It was the kind of quiet that seemed to lean in, listening, as if the earth itself was waiting to see what she would do next. She walked. Each step kicked dust into the hem of her skirt. Her shoes blistered her heels, but she didn't stop. She had no map, no name worth using, and no coin in her pocket. But something in her refused to sit and wait. She was not made to wilt. The sun slipped lower. Shadows stretched like old regrets. Her body began to tilt from weariness, her breath catching sharp in her throat. Hunger scratched at her ribs like a stray dog looking for a door to scratch. When she stumbled on a dip in the land, her knees caught the earth hard, and she stayed there, palms pressed to dirt, hair in her face, breath hot against the soil. She whispered something then, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. It didn't matter. No one was near enough to hear. Except him. A horse approached quietly, hooves muffled on the soft path. He rode without urgency, like a man used to open space and time stretching long before him. Dust clung to his shirt, dark with sweat at the collar. His face wasn't young, but it wasn't old either. Just weathered in that way men get when the land shapes them more than mirrors ever could. He stopped a few feet away. She didn't look up. Not right away. He said nothing. When she finally did lift her head, her face was streaked with wind and grit, eyes narrowed against the light. She waited for a question. A judgment. Maybe a laugh. But he didn't offer any of those. He just reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a tin flask, unscrewed it, and leaned down to hand it to her. She hesitated. Then drank. Slowly. He nodded once. Town's west. Still a ways off. You won't make it on foot before night. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her voice was hoarse from thirst and miles. Don't have anywhere to be. That's so. She looked down at her suitcase. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl like fingers brushing skin. Not many folks pass this way, he said, as if it mattered. Didn't expect anyone would. He swung a leg off the horse and stood beside her. Tall. Broad in the shoulders. Quiet in the way some men are when they've learned not to waste words on things that don't need fixing. You got people? He asked. She shook her head once. He looked past her, toward the flat horizon. Then he whistled low, and the horse came closer. You can ride behind, he said. Ain't far to the cabin. She stared at him. You don't know me, she said. I don't need to. You don't owe me anything. Didn't say I did. She could have said no. She thought about it. Pride was a sharp thing, even when your knees were scraped and your belly empty. But something in his tone, something plain and unbothered, made her believe she wouldn't be paying for his kindness with anything more than a quiet ride and maybe a bit of trust. She stood. He helped her up behind him, careful not to touch more than necessary. The horse didn't complain. The ride was slow. Evening set in soft as a blanket, casting long gold ribbons across the prairie. They didn't speak. She didn't ask his name, and he didn't ask hers. He rode like a man who listened to the rhythm of hooves more than the sound of voices. When the cabin came into view, small, tucked between cottonwoods, its roof patched with care, she felt something inside her unclench. He swung down first, then helped her dismount. The horse snorted and wandered toward a trough. He opened the cabin door and stood aside. You can stay here a while, he said. She paused on the threshold. The scent of wood smoke and old bread reached her nose. The room beyond was plain, a single table, a stove, a bed made with folded blankets and care. No woman's touch, but not neglected either. She stepped in. He brought her suitcase in after, setting it beside the door. Then he walked to the stove, lit the fire with a practiced hand, and put on a pot of water. No questions. No demands. Just motion, steady and quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, spine stiff, hands in her lap. He ladled her stew when it was warm. Set the bowl on the table and moved away. She ate slowly. Eyes watching him more than the food. He busied himself with sharpening a knife, then checking the lock on the door. Just a man in his space. Unbothered. Letting her be. When the sun had vanished and only the lantern flickered, he stood. "I'll sleep out in the barn," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." He nodded once, then stepped out, leaving the door cracked just enough to let in the night air. She sat a long time after he left, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Out the window, the sky was full of stars, cold and watching. She lay down on the bed, pulled the quilt up to her chin, and whispered his words once more into the stillness. "You can stay here a while." For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she believed it. Morning crept in quiet through the cracks of the cabin walls, painting soft light across the rough-hewn floor. The smell of smoke and something gently cooking stirred her from sleep before the warmth of the bed even left her bones. She blinked toward the window, momentarily unsure where she was, until the memory returned. The horse. The stew. The silence. The man. She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. A worn dress, freshly washed, hung near the door, set out without a word. Her own dress, still damp from being scrubbed clean, hung beside it. Outside, the steady thump of an axe followed a rhythm as old as land clearing itself. She stayed still and listened. When she stepped out, the morning wind bit at her bare ankles, but she didn't complain. The man stood near the woodpile, sleeves rolled, face calm as always. He didn't glance up when he spoke. "Coffee's hot. Help yourself." She did. The tin mug burned her palms in the best way. She sipped and sat on the steps, watching steam rise from the rim and disappear into the sky. He chopped 3 more logs before wiping his brow with the back of his wrist and finally looking at her. "You sleep all right?" She nodded. He looked satisfied with that and said no more. For 3 days, the routine continued like a song that didn't need a chorus. He worked. She watched. Then slowly, she began to move around the edges of the space, straightening things, fixing what was torn, washing what had been left untouched for months. He never told her to stop. But he never asked her to help, either. That mattered. At night, he slept in the barn. She offered the floor once. He declined without pride, just stating plainly, "The horse don't mind me." She wondered if he'd always been alone. One evening, she ventured into the small town with him. They rode in silence, the creak of the saddle filling the air between them. Her heart thudded as they neared the buildings, not fear, exactly, but something that lived beside it, memory. The townsfolk watched her with that slow, long kind of stare reserved for strangers and women traveling with men not their kin. But no one spoke ill. An old woman outside the mercantile gave her a small nod and handed her a bar of soap wrapped in paper. The look in her eyes was not pity. It was something warmer. Shared understanding, maybe. A boy, barely 13, whistled low as they passed. "That your wife, mister?" The cowboy didn't pause. "That's a guest," he said. The boy grinned. "She sure is pretty." The woman's cheeks colored, but the cowboy said nothing more. They bought beans, a spool of thread, and 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth. Then rode home beneath a pale sky blushed with dusk. That night, by lamplight, she sewed a loose button back onto one of his shirts. Her fingers worked without thought, muscle memory from years of mending others' things. He watched her from the table, nursing a cup of something strong-smelling. "You got a quiet way about you," he said. She didn't look up. "That bother you?" "No. It suits you." Silence stretched again, but this one didn't feel empty. It felt full, like 2 trees growing side by side, their roots tangling beneath soil they'd never speak about. Later, as the lantern flickered low, she asked what had been curling inside her all day. "Why'd you let me stay?" He didn't answer right away. Just leaned back in his chair, looking at her in that steady way of his, not inspecting, not measuring. Just seeing. "Because someone once did the same for me," he said. She nodded like she understood. Because she did. They didn't speak again that night. The next morning, he came in from the barn holding a bundle of eggs and left them on the table. She cooked them with a hand steady now, the fear having gone soft around the edges. By the end of the week, she was answering to greetings from townsfolk with a nod and a small smile. Her green dress, once stiff with old dust, had found its shape again under her careful hands. She braided her hair differently. Not like she used to, but not like she was hiding, either. They began sharing meals at the table instead of eating apart. She asked about the land, about the horse's name, about the scars on his hands. He answered slow, but true. In return, she told him about Ireland. About how rain never felt cold there, not like here. About her mother's songs. And about silence, how she grew up learning that some men wield it like a weapon, while others carry it like a wound. He listened. Never interrupted. Never filled the air just to claim it. One dusk, after supper, they sat on the porch together watching a storm gather in the distance. The clouds rolled like bruises across the sky. She sipped tea from a chipped cup, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. "I don't know what's next," she said, almost to the air. He didn't reply right away. Then he said, "You don't have to. Not yet." She looked at him. "I've always had to know. Always had to plan. You don't have to hear." The sky rumbled low, and she felt it in her chest. Not fear, something else. A loosening. Like maybe she could let the world spin a while without chasing after it. She turned back to the darkening fields. "Your name," she said softly. "What is it?" He said it. It was simple, old. The kind of name carved into fence posts or cattle brands. She repeated it, slowly, tasting each syllable. He watched her carefully. "That a name you'd carry?" he asked. She didn't answer. Just looked at him a moment too long. Then went back inside. But that night, before sleep claimed her, she whispered his name again into the dark. And this time, she smiled. Not because she had it, but because he'd offered it. Outside, the storm passed without rain. Just thunder walking low across the hills like a warning that never came. And inside the cabin, under that roof patched by quiet hands, two souls began to understand what shelter really meant. Not just walls and a bed, but the peace that settles when kindness has no price, and safety is given like bread, not like favors. Tomorrow would come, sure as breath. But tonight, she was safe. And that, for the first time in a long time, was enough. It was nearly midday when the rider came, kicking dust up the main road like an omen. She was at the pump outside the store, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands red from scrubbing flour sacks meant to become curtains. Her hair was pinned up in a loose braid, face sun-warmed, calm in that quiet way she'd earned. She didn't see the rider until the horse's shadow fell long beside her bucket. She turned. And time folded. The man dismounted with a kind of authority that came less from character and more from ownership, the kind of ownership born of money and male pride, not earned trust. He was dressed too clean for the land, boots polished, shirt stiff. But the face was unmistakable. Her past had ridden into town. She didn't speak. Neither did he, not right away. He tipped his hat with mock politeness and let his eyes rake over her as if counting his losses. "So," he said finally, "this is where you ended up." She lifted the bucket, said nothing, and turned toward the cabin path. He followed, uninvited, the gravel crunching beneath his fine boots. He had a voice that could sound kind if he wanted it to, but it always ended in something colder, like winter wind behind a soft curtain. "You look better than I expected," he called. "Didn't think you'd land on your feet after being turned out." She stopped. "You turned me out," she said, voice even. "I had my reasons." "No. You had your pride." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite regret. He walked closer, lowering his voice as if they were still in some parlor in the east, as if the land and sky didn't hear every word. "You were promised, and I intended to keep that promise. But then the papers came back. Said you were barren. That you'd been ill. You think I was going to build a legacy with a woman who couldn't bear a name forward?" Her fingers curled around the handle of the bucket until her knuckles whitened. She didn't answer. He looked past her then, toward the cabin where smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. A shape moved near the barn. The cowboy. He was walking toward them with that same deliberate pace he always had, quiet as a shadow cast in noon sun. His face unreadable. His eyes steady. The man squared his shoulders. "I came to bring her back," he called. The cowboy didn't stop walking. "She was promised to me," the man continued. "It's legal. Ask any court." The cowboy reached them. He didn't glance at her, not yet. His gaze stayed on the man. "She ain't a promise," he said softly. "She's a person. She's mine." "No," the cowboy said, still calm. "She isn't." The man sneered. "And what is she to you?" The cowboy finally looked at her then. Not to claim. Not to shield. Just to see. Her eyes met his, and in that silence, a choice was made. Not spoken. Known. "She's the woman I sit beside in the evening," the cowboy said. "The one who makes my cabin feel like a home. That's what she is." The man let out a laugh sharp as glass. "She can't give you children." The cowboy blinked once, unmoved. "There's more ways to build a life than with blood. And she's ruined." The cowboy didn't flinch. "She's strong," he said. "She's kind. She's been wronged by men who don't know how to carry anything but their own name." His voice wasn't raised. But the steadiness of it was louder than any shout. The townsfolk had started to gather, quiet steps from porches, eyes watching from behind barrels and dusty glass panes. Not a crowd, but enough. Enough to make the air feel thick with judgment or justice. The old woman from the store came and stood beside the fence, arms crossed. The ranch boy leaned against the rail with a scowl that didn't belong on a face that young. The man shifted his weight. "This place," he said, gesturing around. "It's nothing. You think this is a life? You'll grow old and bitter. He'll grow tired of you. Then where will you be?" She stepped forward then. Not much, just one step. But it was enough to stand between them. "You had a chance," she said. "You could have had a wife. A partner. But you wanted a womb. You wanted a name carried, not a life shared." He opened his mouth. She raised her voice. "You never gave me your name. You gave me shame. You gave me silence." She turned slightly, so her shoulder brushed the cowboy's sleeve. "But he gave me a place. A fire. His name, if I want it." The crowd didn't cheer. But the silence that followed rang like a bell tolling for the end of something ugly. The man's face twisted, not with sorrow, but insult. He stepped back, mounting his horse with a flick of his reins like trying to reclaim dignity. "You'll regret this," he muttered. The cowboy finally spoke again. "No," he said. "You will." The man wheeled his horse and rode off in a cloud of self-importance and rage, kicking dust into the blue. She didn't move. Her breath came shallow, her shoulders trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of what had passed. The cowboy reached for her, slow, careful. "You all right?" She nodded once. Then looked at the people who had gathered, who had watched her stand tall in the face of the man who once cast her aside like old linens. "Thank you," she said, not just to him, but to the town, to the earth, to the wind. The old woman nodded back, eyes shining. The boy spit into the dust and muttered, "Hope he falls off that horse." The moment passed. The crowd drifted away. She and the cowboy stood in the soft quiet, the sun low now, shadows long. She turned to him. "Did you mean it?" "Which part?" "That I could have your name." He looked at her then like he was seeing her for the first time and also the 100th. "I meant it," he said. "But only if you want it." She studied his face, a face made not handsome by bone or beard but by the kindness etched in the corners of his eyes. "I do," she said. He smiled, faint but real. The bucket still sat on the ground where she had dropped it. Water sloshed inside, still clear. She bent, picked it up, and they walked back to the cabin together, side by side. The wind tugged at her hair, loosened a strand. He reached and gently tucked it behind her ear. And though no papers were signed, no preacher called, something had shifted, sealed not in ink but in truth. The past had come to claim her. But she chose to stay. Dawn came with the scent of frost on the grass and a stillness so complete, it pressed against the windows like breath holding steady. The cowboy was already on the porch, boots planted, rifle across his lap, not in threat, but in readiness. The barn door creaked once behind him, then quieted. Inside the cabin, she stirred. She didn't need to ask. She felt it too. Some things come back not because they belong but because they can't bear to be forgotten. And the man who had tried to own her was one of those things. She dressed in silence, fingers steady, hair braided with care. There was no fear in her chest, just clarity. The kind that comes after rain when the world looks clean and bare. She stepped outside and stood beside him. No words passed between them. The first rider appeared just past the eastern ridge. Then another. Then a third. Men who looked like they hadn't been told no in years. The suitor rode at the center, his eyes narrowed, his pride bruised raw. He came not for her, not truly, but for what he thought had been taken. They stopped at the fence. The cowboy didn't rise. Just kept his hands resting quiet on the wood stock of the rifle, like a man used to choosing peace but not afraid of the other thing. The suitor spoke first. "You still have time to make this right." The cowboy looked out at the hills, the slow roll of golden light across the grass. Then he looked back at her. "She don't need me to make anything right. She already did that herself." One of the other riders, younger and thinner, shifted in his saddle. His eyes darted to her, uncertain. "This land is full of empty names," the suitor said. "People come and go. But legal's legal." She was promised. She chose, the cowboy replied. "And you don't get to rewrite that." There was a long pause. No threat was shouted. No gun raised. But something in the air tightened. Then a sound broke it. Footsteps. From town, slow and deliberate. The old woman from the store appeared first, walking with her cane like the earth owed her passage. Then came the boy, jaw set. Then the storekeeper, then a couple who'd nodded quietly to the woman in town but never spoken aloud. They weren't armed. They weren't angry. They were simply present. That was enough. The suitor's jaw worked. He wasn't a man used to losing ground without a fight, but this was no brawl. This was something heavier, truth carried by the weight of quiet eyes and firm spines. He spat in the dust, turned his horse, and said nothing as he rode away. The other two followed. The tension left with them, scattering into wind. The cowboy stood slowly. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. The townsfolk nodded once, turned back to their mourning, no victory parade needed. Just the knowledge that something wrong had been turned aside. Later, when the sun hung high and the bread was cooling on the windowsill, he carved something small from antler at the table. She watched him, sewing a patch onto a quilt, fingers precise. "You ever think about marriage?" he asked, not looking up. "I used to," she said. "Then I stopped. Then I started again." He nodded, finished the carving, and set it down beside her. A simple ring, smooth and pale. It wasn't polished or fine, but it was shaped with care, worn soft at the edges by his thumb. "I can't offer much," he said. "But my name's honest. And it's yours, if you want it." She touched the ring, then looked up. "I don't need much. Just the quiet. Just you." They married 2 days later under the cottonwoods beside the creek. No guests beyond the preacher and a pair of doves that flew overhead. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself. He wore his best shirt, collar pressed flat. When the preacher asked if she would take his name, she didn't speak right away. She looked at the man beside her, the one who had stood for her without raising his voice, who had built her shelter not just from logs but from patience. Then she said, softly, "I already have." He slipped the ring onto her hand, and the preacher closed his book. There was no applause. No crowd. Just the wind moving through the trees like a hymn only the land knew. That evening, they sat on the porch, side by side. She rested her head on his shoulder. The sun was setting in long, amber streaks, casting everything in gold. "You ever regret not asking more questions?" she asked. He smiled into the horizon. "No. You came with your own answers." She took his hand, the one with rough knuckles and careful strength, and laced her fingers through his. "I think I came with nothing." "No," he said. "You came with fire." The stars blinked out, one by one, like lanterns being lit for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. And from within the cabin, the smell of wood smoke lingered, sweet and steady. There were no more visitors. No more letters. No one came looking. Whatever names she'd been called before were lost to time. Now, when she rose in the morning, her boots by the door and her name freshly spoken on the wind, it was his name she carried. Not as a burden. But as a belonging. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes like a soft knock at the door, patient and quiet. Sometimes, a name isn't just something you're given, it's something you earn, together. And in a cabin tucked between cottonwoods and silence, that name was hers now. Not borrowed. Not taken. Given.